Norworth Borough Council for Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. It is 7:35 p.m. Mr. West, Acting Manager West, would you call the roll, please?
Absolutely. Vice President Tevlin Moffett.
Present.
Councilman McGreevy. Here. Councilman Nixon.
Here.
Councilwoman Pananopoulos. Absent. Councilwoman Rickards.
Here.
Councilman Weisbord.
Here.
Mayor Deutsch.
Here.
And Council President Aaron Muedrick.
Here. Mr. McGreevy, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have it. That's weird. Thanks.
I have no comments this evening, Ms. Mayor.
Just a few comments this evening. I have the monthly Norbert Police Department report. Thank you to Chief Gallagher for getting me the statistics. There's been, with the increase in enforcement on speeding and stopping at traffic stops in the borough, there's been a noticeable decrease in accidents in the borough. So I'd just like to thank all our officers and Chief Gallagher for their hard work in keeping us all safe and sound in the borough. And I just want to give a round of applause. Also, just a note, the ordinance that we signed regarding plastics, single-use plastics, goes into effect today. So, thanks to everyone and Councilwoman Rickards for hard work in getting that done. So you can still get a plastic bag, thank you bag at your stores. You will be required to pay 10 cents for that bag. And that's just a little reminder to ask ourselves whether we really need those bags or whether there's another way to transport the things that we buy. So that's it for my report tonight. I'm going to submit the numbers to Council President Muedrick, and that's it.
All right, thank you very much. I will now hand off the meeting to Solicitor Walco to begin a public hearing for Ordinance 1015, Firefighter Tax Credit.
At this time, we're going to adjourn the public meeting and into the public hearing for Ordinance 1015. This is an ordinance that amends the Norworth Borough Code, Chapter 11, Fire Department, to add a new article, establishing the Volunteer Credit Service Credit Program, which enacts real estate tax credits for qualifying volunteer members of the Norworth Fire Company and Norworth Ambulance, and establishes the administrative procedures that will be established within the borough for those credits. I'm going to mark a few exhibits. The first one is Board Exhibit 1, which is the ordinance itself. Board Exhibit 2 is the legal notice for tonight's hearing. Board Exhibit 3 is the proof of publication in the Mainline Times for this ordinance and the hearing, which was published on March 31st, 2019. Board Exhibit 4 is the proof of submission to the Montgomery County Law Library, which was received on March 25th, 2019. Board Exhibit 5 is the accompanying resolution, which establishes the guidelines that need to be fulfilled in order to receive that credit, which is also on the agenda later tonight. We discussed this ordinance last month at the business meeting, went through it. It's obviously unchanged since that time. Again, it establishes a tax credit for those volunteer members of the Norworth Fire Company and Norworth Ambulance who live in Norworth, who fulfill certain criteria to get that tax credit. Are there any questions from the public, any comments or any questions from the public regarding this ordinance? Yes?
What is the tax credit intended to do?
The tax credit, which this was, to back up, was established through the Pennsylvania Act 172 in 2016, statewide, which allowed local municipalities who have been struggling to fulfill their volunteer fire companies and volunteer ambulance companies to sort of give an incentive to them to help them with recruitment of local volunteers. So many municipalities throughout the Commonwealth and in Montgomery County have already enacted this ordinance, essentially to say that if you're volunteering this time, these hours, for the benefit of the borough, we'd like to give you a little bit of break on taxes that you pay for the borough.
Municipal taxes.
Municipal taxes. So this does not affect school taxes. This is just the local real estate. Any other questions or comments? Hearing and seeing none, I'll turn it over to the council if there are any questions or comments on this ordinance. Hearing and seeing none, we will close this public hearing, and Ordinance 1015 is now in a position to be voted upon at the public meeting.
All right, thank you. Solicitor Walco, would you like to open a hearing for the Norworth Borough Comprehensive Plan?
Yes, we will adjourn into another hearing, this one on the Norworth 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I'm going to mark a few exhibits and then I'll turn it over to Maggie Dobbs from the Montgomery County Planning Commission. First is Board Exhibit 1, which is the draft Norworth 2040 Comprehensive Plan itself. The plan has been on the website and has been available in the office for public's view. Board Exhibit 2 is the legal notice and proof of publication in the Mainline Times for tonight's public hearing, which was published on both March 31st, 2019 and April 7th, 2019, and again in the Mainline Times. Board Exhibit 3 is a proof of submission from the Borough to and review of the plan by the Montgomery County Planning Commission. So it's the Montgomery County Planning Commission review letter of the plan. Board Exhibit 4 is the proof of submission from the Borough to the Lower Merion School District, which is required on the municipality's planning code when enacting a comp plan. So that was submitted to the Lower Merion School District, which is the school district for Norbert, obviously. Board Exhibit 5 is the proof of submission to Lower Merion Township. Again, the municipality's planning code requires submission to contiguous municipalities, Lower Merion being the only contiguous municipality. So those are the exhibits that I will mark for this hearing. At this time, I think it would be best to turn it over to Ms. Dobbs to sort of give a brief presentation as to what a comprehensive plan is in general, what it does, maybe what it does not do.
I'll get you.
And explain what our plan establishes.
Should I move?
Okay.
Probably. I don't want you to see blinded.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna sit next to you.
Yeah.
There we go.
You gotta do something about your neighbor. That was a joke.
This should be okay.
Oops. Did you turn off? Yep. Just a little tighter. Yep.
That one.
Is that good?
Yep.
Okay. Can everyone see that okay? All right, wonderful. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. My name is Maggie Dobbs. I'm a senior planner at the Montgomery County Planning Commission, and I am the planning consultant working with Norworth Borough. I was the lead planner in completing this comprehensive plan, so I'm excited to walk you through where we are with it. We do have the draft available, and I hope that you've all had an opportunity to read through it. And so tonight we're just going to go through what it says and receive any public feedback. So Norworth 2040, this is our comprehensive plan. It's actually going to be the first comprehensive plan that the borough has ever adopted. So this is a really great milestone for the borough in that it's going to outline our goals and recommendations for future growth and planning over the next 20 years. It serves as an umbrella policy document since we wanted to establish our community vision and then establish various goals and specific implementation recommendations in order to achieve that vision. This document will serve as the guiding document for all decision making in the borough moving forward. So we start off with a broad-based community vision, which was identified through various community outreach events and work with a steering committee. We've identified specific plan goals under that vision, and then in order to achieve those goals, we have identified specific implementation steps, which are going to be more concrete steps that we will work to implement over the next 10 to 20 years. So again, we did have extensive community outreach. We had numerous events we participated in numerous community events to spread the word about the comprehensive planning process. We had an open house in the fall, and we've had steering committee meetings for the past year plus to look at all of the different issues in the borough, look at all the different facets of life in the borough. So we kicked it off last March with we called it our joint task force committee meeting. So we had members of Borough Council, the Planning Commission, and the public in attendance. And then we've, like I said, attended numerous summer concert series, Norbert Day, the Fall Festival, and then culminating in our open house in the fall with the draft writing process, input from the steering committee, and then of course now we're at the point where we are holding our public hearing and looking forward to an adoption. So just to touch briefly then on what the plan entails, we wanted to again focus on more of our policy developments and make recommendations for values-based decision-making processes within the borough. We discovered that there's a lot of integrated themes throughout the borough. Obviously, one thing impacts another, and especially in a small community like this, there's no way that we could isolate or silo any of these independent features. So what we did is we created these guiding principles which do weave in with each other, but these form the structure of the actual plan, so each of the chapters is one of these guiding principles. So we have land use, community character, stewardship, economic opportunity, and circulation, so that's our transportation one. All of these, I might add, these are all components that are required by the municipality's planning code, which is the governing document that outlines how we can conduct planning in the state of Pennsylvania. So we did meet all of the criteria in terms of the different features that we had to include in the plan and the different topic areas. So those were all kind of lumped together into these broader guiding principle categories. As I said, each of these guiding principles does contain a numerous different facets to it. And then within each chapter, we've made specific implementation, we've identified specific policy goals and implementation steps for each of those chapters, which is summarized in a table, our implementation chart, which is found at the end of the document. And again, everything kind of works its way up. So all of those implementation steps should work to achieve those goals, and those goals then achieve that vision for the future that the community has identified. Our recommendations are outlined over the course of 20 years. A comprehensive plan is theoretically only a 10-year plan, in that the MPC, the Municipalities Planning Code, requires that we update the plan every 10 years. But because of the nature of planning and because of the nature of municipal governance and budgets, we wanted to take an even further, a longer time frame to identify some of those specific goals that we would like to start to set ourselves up for. So we do look at it from a 20-year time frame, and then in 10 years when the plan is up for a renewal, at that point we can take a look and say, did we achieve our goals? Do we need to modify any of these goals? And then we can amend it and continue working forward to achieving that community's vision. Within the implementation chart, we do outline, for ease of reference, some of our priority levels. So we've just categorized them into low, medium, and high priority levels, and then our implementation timeline. So those things that we think that we can implement within the near future, the medium future, and then the long term. So just briefly, I don't want to reread, if you've all read the plan, you've all seen these, but these are our guiding principles, and these are our specific guiding principle visions. So under land use, we really wanted to emphasize the preservation of the existing land use pattern in order to ensure that we can provide the highest quality of life for all residents, regardless of age or ability. So here we're focusing a lot on housing, our future land uses, looking at our parks and recreation opportunities. Under community character, this one really focuses on trying to capture those intangibles that make Norworth a great place to live. So within here, we took a look at all of the different community groups that operate in the borough, and trying to capture, like I said, some of those intangibles that really create that fabric of life, that sense of place that's very strong here. Under stewardship, this one is going to be focused primarily on our environmental characteristics of the borough. So here we feel that responsible stewardship of the natural and built environment. Obviously there's not too much in terms of what we would consider natural or untouched lands, but there's still a great amount of impact that we can have by practicing responsible stewardship of those resources. Stormwater management is a huge thing within this, especially in a built-out borough that has high impervious cover, and also taking a look at ways that we can be more innovative in the borough with regards to energy conservation. Under economic opportunity, this is primarily focusing on our commercial corridors along Haverford Avenue and Montgomery Avenue, so establishing our vision to create this dynamic commercial core in the heart of the downtown, and then also to come up with a plan to really revitalize the Montgomery Avenue corridor and create a really attractive gateway for the borough as you drive through, which obviously involves coordination with Lower Merion right across the border though there. So this primarily focuses on how we can work on business retention, business expansion, and the various infrastructure that we can install to help support that, such as streetscape improvements. Obviously the wonderful trees in downtown are some examples of that. Circulation, like I said, so this is going to be our transportation, so we're taking a look at all modes of transportation, so not just vehicular movements, but also pedestrian movements and bicyclist movements and public transportation. So the borough is really blessed to have a well-connected sidewalk network that connects within and outside of the borough. It's serviced by the regional rail and the SEPTA bus lines. So we do have some enormous opportunities here for our circulation patterns, but always opportunities for improvements and enhancements. So we've identified some of those goals. Now you're asking, this is great and everything looks wonderful, but how do we actually get to where we want to go? How do we implement these recommendations that we've identified? So we do have, like I said, that implementation chart that shows us what we've identified for our priority areas and our timelines. We've identified a number of partners that can work with the borough to achieve some of those goals. So we've identified partners like the newly created EAC, various community partners who are going to be instrumental in coordinating on some of these recommendations. So at the end of the day, it's going to be Borough Council who leads this effort. The Planning Commission is also a huge partner in this, and then the borough staff as well. The Planning Commission at their April meeting did request that they serve as the entity through which the work plan that we create in terms of which goals we want to work on for any given year. If we create a work plan and it comes through the Planning Commission for their initial feedback to then recommend to council. So that's something that was in the meeting minutes, and so council members, that's something that we can discuss. And then obviously we want all of the decisions made by our borough administration and our council members. We highly encourage all of those decisions to be made with reference to the comprehensive plan to ensure that any decisions that are made are consistent with the goals that we've identified through this process. And then once we adopt the comprehensive plan, one of the concerns that people always have is, well, this is great, but it's going to sit on a shelf and we're not really going to do anything with it after the first year or two. So how do we keep it current? How do we keep it in the forefront of people's minds? One of the recommendations that I would offer is to establish an annual work program. So this could be an annual report that identifies all of the different steps that were taken throughout that past year to implement the recommendations of the comprehensive plan and to identify the future steps for the following year. This, of course, would be really important during the budgeting season. If there are any recommendations that require capital improvements, opportunities for grant funding, that's where we would need to make those decisions. So council, these are opportunities for you to make those decisions for the following year, to identify all of those areas that we would need to allocate any funding resources or the like for that plan to make sure that we move forward on our implementation. I would also recommend potentially that the comprehensive plan consistency could be a standing agenda item or just something that we reference to continue referencing back to the plan and to keep it on the forefront. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is that this is a living document. So we're establishing these policy goals now, and we did so gathering that input from the community to ensure that these goals are representative of the community's values. But this plan is not set in stone. It is not chiseled in rock. It can be amended if, at the end of the day, we realize that there's something that needs to be addressed. Hopefully, we have done a good enough job that for the next 10 years, these will be our goals and our priorities because that's what the community has expressed to us. But just know that it is advisory and that the ultimate decision will be with the staff, administration, and your elected officials. So quickly, I just wanted to go through some of the feedback that we received. The Planning Commission has made a couple of recommendations to strengthen some of the text that we have in the plan, to upgrade the SEPTA train station, to make a recommendation that we need to upgrade the train station. Recommendations to strengthen some of our discussion about housing preservation and addressing climate change in a more direct manner. Amending recommendations regarding the historic preservation to not be simply referencing historic quote-unquote properties. It's more of an architectural preservation rather than an historic preservation, so it's somewhat semantics, but I think it captures the broader essence of what preservation means to the community. And then just additional recommendations to improve some public art installations. So we do have some recommendations already in the plan with regard to that, but that was a recommendation to include an additional one. So at this point, the draft that we have is in its rough draft form. There are some minor text edits that have to be made. We took another fine-tooth comb through it, and of course there's always some minor text edits that you miss. You know, there's an extra space in between an end of a sentence and a period or things like that. So those are minor corrections to make. We will need to, in the final draft, include the resolution adoption, or the adoption resolution, I'm sorry. So the adoption resolution that council signs will then have to be scanned, and that goes into the document. And then if there are any other updates or modifications that we wanted to make, those can be made in the plan. So when all is said and done, Montgomery County Planning Commission, as part of our Community Planning Assistance Contract, will provide 25 printed copies of the plan to be distributed at the borough's pleasure. And then we'll also provide a digital copy which will live as a PDF on the borough's website. And we've been asked to provide hyperlinks to that. So anytime that we cite material, we can link to that in the plan. So it should be really easy to use. So that is my brief summary. At this point, where's John?
Turning it back over to
I'm turning it back over to John.
I will turn it back over to the public to see if there are any comments or questions regarding the plan. Thank you.
I'd like to read the letter that I sent to council. That's okay? Is that okay?
Just a heads up, everyone will be limited to 3 minutes. That should be fine.
Okay. Dear members of council and Mayor Deutsch, we, meaning my husband and I, respectfully ask you to delay your vote on the comprehensive plan until the following problems have been addressed. The comprehensive plan, quote, desires to preserve and enhance its historic neighborhoods, end quote, but it does not lay out in general terms a practical plan for how this will be accomplished. How does the land use pattern in the form-based code, quote, preserve and enhance, end quote, historic neighborhoods, when the most historically significant of these, with the exception of Norbert Park, have been rezoned to allow for much greater density? The problem is rooted in the fact that the cart came before the horse. The new zoning code was put in place before the comprehensive plan. The plan should have come first, then the zoning should have been designed to support the plan. But we are now dealing with a situation in which the plan gives a nod of approval to the zoning and fails to address the many issues and inconsistencies and downright failures of the new form-based code as it is written. The above statement is also not robust enough to offer support to the Norworth Heritage Action Plan that is still underway. If a neighborhood is zoned to allow apartment buildings, historic ordinances are not sufficient to protect older homes from being torn down. Developers will override these ordinances unless zoning and parking laws support them. The comprehensive plan needs stronger language urging for adjustments to be made in the zoning code to protect our architectural history. Sincerely, Alex and Steve. Now, I just talked with Bob beforehand, so we don't necessarily have to postpone it, but I would like to see that addressed in any way we can. So,
thought you said that it need be, the plan could be amended.
Yes, so at this stage in the process, council has on their agenda a resolution for adoption for tonight. We have achieved our 45-day review period, but that doesn't necessarily mean that council is obligated to adopt the plan tonight. If it's council's pleasure to adopt the plan, you may adopt it in its form as it currently stands, or, and John, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the council could also adopt it pending revisions or adopt it with amendments outlined to be made. So that is an option, or we simply take some more time to address some of the recommendations given to us by the Planning Commission and the public, and then revisit this at a future council date.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, council could adopt as it is today substantively, make substantive changes to the plan and adopt it with those substantive changes, or again, if we adopted as these technical changes, that really would not impact the need for the final approval. That can be done.
Yes.
Afterwards.
And my understanding is that if the changes were to be substantive, that there would have to be another 45-day review period. But if the changes aren't deemed to be substantive, and I would defer to your legal counsel on that, then yes, we can make amendments to the plan.
And even after that.
Even after adoption.
Does anybody else have any questions? Just in the back.
Just my comment is somewhat in similar line of thinking in how would your general terms affect the zoning that we have put in place, and we have 3 major residential / business potential buildings going up in the borough right now that I don't know that they would be affected by any of your good missions by your plan right now, because they're affected by the zoning that is in place. That's going to allow a lot of construction that may not comply with what your thoughts
And can you please say your
would
name?
put. Hi, I'm Jennifer Lammer. I live on Windsor Avenue.
Thank you.
And my other comment is, I don't know, did you get a lot of public feedback during your process?
No, I received 8 total responses from the public.
So I had been at the March planning meeting when you announced that you were going to be putting this forward and putting it to the public. And it was a deep dive to go into the internet, even find the document, which I was glad to find it, 152 pages, but it was a lot to print out and process. And I talked to neighbors, and very few, if any, know that this is all of your work that you put into this plan is out there, and that there's this grand scheme that could affect the borough in a big way. And I've spoken to fellow members about this before, but the communication to the residents of the borough at something as far-reaching as this is negligible. And even for the listing in the Norworth Weekly newsletter, there was mention of tonight's meeting. There was nothing in highlight about the plan is before us. Tonight it may be voted on. There's just so little communication. I know that's not your issue, but I put that to the council and borough administration. There's no communication going on right now warranted for something as important as this. But thank you for your work.
So, did you feel that you were constrained by the current zoning in doing this plan, or does your plan take into consideration if the need arose of rezonings or recommendations for certain uses in the future?
Sure. So the future land use map and the future land use plan does closely mimic the zoning code that was adopted. That's not to say, though, that the zoning can't or shouldn't be amended. So we do have recommendations in the comprehensive plan that deal specifically with the subdivision and land development ordinance and the zoning ordinance to continually monitor the effect of those and make recommendations that will achieve then the goals of the various goals that we've identified through in all of the different guiding principles.
Any other questions, comments from the public? Hearing and seeing none, I'll turn it over to the board. Does the council have any questions or comments?
I do. You showed a slide that said, made a suggestion of perhaps loans from the NIDA, which is not allowed in the state of Pennsylvania, to my best of my knowledge. So I don't want to give people the impression that that would be something that is allowed. So we have to come up with another plan there. The second point I'd like to make is that in the comprehensive plan, there was a statement about our parks. And while we have this larger park here and Save My Park being the smaller park, there was a recommendation about the school district's use. And I do support the idea that we share our fields when possible with the public school district and maybe have a wider process of sharing with other organizations. But clearly, this is the larger of the two parks, and we know that Lower Merion Township shares their parks with the school district for a fee, and that some of that fee structure and those ideas were not particularly stated in this document or compared at all. So that is one of my concerns. And another of my concerns, similarly brought up to the public, is when I had a conversation with some of my neighbors regarding what was going to take place tonight, they were not aware. And while I understand that 8 emails or 8 phone calls or whatever you did receive maybe isn't a lot, I am very cautious in taking any steps going forward, because I do think that we need to hear more from the public that way, and I do think that we need to maybe make some changes, but I don't know how my other council members feel. I'm not feeling particularly comfortable in this moment to go forward. Thanks, Gigi. And just really quickly to address the point about the industrial authority, that was simply a point of conversation that had come up in the Planning Commission meeting, but it is not a recommendation in the plan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other council members?
I have 2 questions that are unrelated. I was wondering if you did have coordination with the Pennsylvania Historic Museums Commission Director Corey Kegerais, and if so, how was his input reflected in the comp plan?
Sure. So I did have extensive coordination with Corey Kegerais. He actually was the one to provide the recommendation implementation steps for the historic preservation. Those are his recommendations directly. The intent was we didn't dive too deeply into that matter in the comprehensive plan because of the complementary plan that he and his team are working on. So we focused more on broader housing and neighborhood preservation goals, because we understand his efforts are to focus more specifically on historic matters particularly.
Okay. And before I ask my second question, I just want to tag on. When the Corey Kegerais of the Pennsylvania Historic Museums Commission and Kathleen Athenoff of the Lower Merion Conservancy, along with the Norbert Task Force, when they present their recommendations to the council, is there a way, will the comp plan require any amendment at that point, or is it mostly, will their recommendations mostly be recommendations that we amend the zoning ordinance?
I'm not familiar with the recommendations that are in their plan and what outcomes those recommendations will take for implementation.
Okay. Because it's my understanding is that we are anticipating that group will provide us with specific policy recommendations around preserving historic architectural landscape, like buildings and landscape, and that we can then incorporate those either in the saldo, in the or in the zoning ordinance, and if need be, we can amend the comp plan.
Right. So the goal of coordinating with Mr. Kegerais on this is that if they do make recommendations in their plan, the comprehensive plan is broad enough that it should support whatever those goals are. So I don't think that there's going to be any inconsistencies or anything that would directly and adversely counter the recommendations made in the preservation plan. So if anything, this just becomes a broader policy document, and then the preservation plan dives down into more of those specific recommendations. So again, If there is something that would be contradictory, then yes, an amendment to the comprehensive plan is possible. However, I strongly doubt that that will happen because we've made broad enough recommendations in the comprehensive plan to support the recommendations that they will be making in their plan.
Well, I think there may be, in some of the feedback that I've gotten from the public over the last 48 hours, I think there may be some understanding that the comprehensive plan is more specific than it ought to, that it's a very broad document, that it's not a specific policy document, and so people are expecting it to impact our lives in a kind of very direct and immediate way.
Okay.
Whereas it's a kind of. Okay, so I wonder if you could just speak to sort of the impact of the comprehensive plan.
Sure.
And yeah.
Okay, sure. So the comprehensive plan is intended to be a broad-based policy document, and it does include specific implementation recommendations, but at the same time, because this is intending to serve as an umbrella policy, its intent and its goal is to more outline what the community's vision is and what the broad value-based rationale is behind these things. So it's providing guidance more so to say, if we have a plan that looks at this, then here are the things that you should be considering as it relates to housing preservation and housing diversity, or landscape preservation, or open space, or economic development opportunities. So it's to outline more of our values that the community shares and less to address specific recommendations. I think one of the clear examples that could help illustrate how the comprehensive plan is a broad policy document is we discuss some of the values and the challenges with our current park space. So Gigi, to your point about Norworth Park, it is a broader discussion about those use patterns and about the challenges in maintaining that space and the value and the meaning that those spaces have for the community. But in the plan, we don't make specific recommendations to allow or disallow something, to require certain maintenance uses or needs or fees, or, do we keep the tennis courts, do we not? Do we resurface the basketball courts, or do we not? Do we rip up the baseball field, or do we not? Whatever those concerns and questions are that we've received throughout this process, this document is not intended to answer those questions. This document is to provide those broad values to say, when we make those decisions, here are the values, here's the policy recommendations that we need to keep in mind as we decide those. And in fact, the recommendations for the open spaces are not to specifically do something to that park or do something with that space, but to create the master plan for that space. So I understand that it might seem duplicative to have a plan, recommend another plan, but this is not the space for those specific policy recommendations, which is why we outline those values in the plan and then recommend a more specific plan to address some of those more specific questions. Now, the things in here that we feel we could make specific recommendations towards, such as maintenance of our sidewalks, that's something very concrete. That's something that we know for a fact we would like to do. So those recommendations about sidewalk maintenance and things of a similar nature are made in here. But some of the broader questions that we have that require much more insight, much more detailed looking at, are left with just the values-based policy recommendations.
Okay, that ties in my second question. The council depends on you as our consultant and the public, and by extension the council, to help us generate a vision and a statement of shared values from within the body of the community, not the body of the council. We're the recipients of a vision that was created by our neighbors through the appointment of a special task force that we advertised. We asked neighbors to participate in a special task force to write the comprehensive plan. People came forward, they were interviewed and selected by council to serve on that task force. You ran that task force for us, correct?
Yes.
There was no chair, there was no vice chair, there was no council involvement in that task force. This was a vision that emerged, and when you presented us with the draft vision, that was the first time any of us read that vision of shared values as a statement coming from the community. So I'm wondering if you can explain to us what happened at the public engagement. If you can briefly share with us what happened during the public engagement, the event that you had at the library, the events that you had at the playground or in the street, at the street festival, at the music festival. What happened at those events? How did you engage with the public? What happened in the meetings that you had with the task force that we appointed to work with you? How did you cook up the shared vision? Because some of the criticism that I've heard over the last 24 hours of people writing and very concerned is that they feel that somehow the cart got put before the horse, that the zoning ordinance was written before the comprehensive plan, and that somehow that skewed the perception of the shared values statement, or maybe it isn't properly understood. So I just wonder if you could speak to that, because. And also, I know other communities have the same issue. How do you engage the public? How do you create a collective vision out of a diverse community like ours? And that's, this is now the fruit of your work, and this is the first time we're having an opportunity even to speak with you about that.
So I'm trying to think of how far back to start. So when we first started with our public engagement, we issued a community survey, and we had over, I believe, 550 community responses from that survey, which is roughly just over 10% of the population. And in terms of survey participation, that's actually really good. So we received a lot of public input from the survey during our initial kickoff phase. And in the public survey, we did ask specific questions, but also had a general kind of what is your vision for the future, kind of name the 3 things that you like the most about Norworth, and maybe name the 3 things that you would most like to change about Norworth. So from that, we were able to bucket a lot of these responses, because responses took on general themes that we started picking out that was indicative of shared values. During the community outreach events, when we were tabling at the various community festivals, we continued that survey outreach. We had opportunities for people to just fill out a card to say what they were thinking about, so we collected more input that way. We received a lot of questions about the future for the community, and just from those anecdotal conversations, we started to gather those general themes that people were expressing to us. So we would go and write all of those down, and we started to see these themes emerge. And then similarly, in the open house, that was the first time that we had proposed the draft goals and recommendations. So we received very valuable feedback from the public, and we had about 80 participants in that activity. And so we did receive very valuable input from the community at that point, and we did make some fairly substantial changes to our goals and recommendations based on that feedback. So the steering committee was providing feedback throughout this whole process. So the way that we worked that is we kind of went through topic area by topic area with the steering committee, coming up with these goals and recommendations, taking a look at the data that we had, formulating an opinion, and the steering committee, an opinion based on fact and knowledge of the community. And the steering committee helped to provide contextual evidence to support the goals that we ended up settling on, and to provide their input as representatives of the community. So throughout that whole process, we did see very, very clear categories of feedback that supported one vision, and that is what we developed then into the plan. Now, certainly not everyone agrees on everything, so we did have some opinions that weren't in direct correlation with others, but we went with the majority opinion, and we considered best planning practices from the broader national field of planning as well. So we pulled in research and data from our American Planning Association, best practices, And then we also relied heavily on previous studies. So the community, while Norworth doesn't have a comprehensive plan yet, there's many, many plans on more specific topic areas. So we relied very heavily on all of those past plans. Those are plans that the community has adopted. Many of them are also very recent, so we were able to use those to help provide us with that evidence-based information that we use to draft the recommendations.
Did you or anyone on the Planning Commission have any reason to think that there's some significant portion of people in this borough that aren't being represented by this comprehensive plan? That there's an unrepresented or a dissenting point of view out there that you just haven't, for some reason, been able to represent? I mean, does that happen in other communities? Does that happen here?
Certainly, one of the hardest jobs in planning is the public outreach component. People are very busy. People have lots of things that are trying to grab their attention, and certainly trying to reach out to all the different segments of the population can be challenging. We did try to diversify our outreach as much as we could. We interviewed individual stakeholders. We relied on them. We reached out to them to help spread the word to their community members within their groups. So we did try to diversify that as much as possible. But in terms of recognizing if there was any specific population that we know we didn't hit, if we didn't get feedback from that group, then it was not made clear to us that there was any large group of people that were dissenting, because we were advertising the steering committee meetings as public meetings for an entire year. We had multiple outreach events. We encouraged people to check in about the plan, and we provided digital literature. We provided in-print literature available at the library and here at Borough Hall. I know it was posted. I know Kimberly and Ed helped with Facebook advertising. So we tried to get the word out as much as we could. At the beginning of the process, we were hanging signs in all of the storefronts. All the businesses on Haverford Avenue got signs that we hung in the windows. So we, short of sending everyone a mailer, we tried to do as much outreach as we possibly could.
Rob?
So part of what's so useful in this plan to us is the way that it integrates the past plans, as you mentioned. So the open space plan of 2006 is linked to the Morris Tree study of 2018. The retail study of 2002 is linked to the heritage study of 2017. And that's difficult work to do. And it's just so critical for us because you've integrated the planning efforts, as you say, that have been more focused. You've integrated those efforts into one document. So I want to thank you for that. I mean, that's one way, very concrete way that I see this being useful to council. And then, as you say, it's advisory to council. So, I mean, that's the key word. It's advisory. You're offering it to us as an integrated planning document, but we can choose to move ahead with certain parts and not with others. I mean, it's advisory to the council. So my one question for you is, when it comes to the end of the plan, you have a grid of priorities. And you know, this is so they're ranked by medium, low, and high priorities to give us a sense of urgency, and I guess how long a task would take. So you've done that work here through the task force. So, but then we're also doing that work as a council. You know, we're trying to prioritize different items, and there may be some disagreement in terms of the priority. You know, I can look at some items here that I would rank as a high priority that are ranked medium or low. So it's just one question I have for you in terms of process. It strikes me as a very minor thing that we could kind of change at any point. And since it's advisory, we don't need to make a formal amendment, right? Okay.
Right, and if there's anything in particular, I mean, we could always modify those priority levels. And I do just want to speak a little bit on the implementation chart. This is something that we discussed at the Planning Commission meeting. But right, so as you say, the implementation chart is organized and it's kind of in chunks depending on the guiding principles. One of the ways that I would like to make this more approachable for council's decision-making process is to group together those implementation steps to form a logical arc. So if project steps, implementation steps naturally go together, which many of them do, to format in such a way that it would create a project arc to say, to get to the master plan for Norworth Park, here are the different steps that we need to take to get there. So this is a kind of a next level implementation chart formatting that I would like to pursue as part of our planning assistance contract, and to make this even more of a stronger tool for the borough to use for decision-making processes, to better understand the interconnections of these different recommendations. So that is just something that we weren't quite able to finish in our timeline, but I feel it's very important that we do that to provide additional resources to the borough to help in that decision-making process.
Ms. Mayer?
Just real briefly, you talked a little bit about the outreach to the public during this whole process. As part of that, I know you had an open house. Mm-hmm. Can you just really briefly it was an all-day open house, and mm-hmm. tell how many people came through and what kind of input did you get from the open house?
Right, sure. So the open house was when we had drafted our initial goals and recommendations. It was all day. I believe it started at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we were there until 7, almost 8 o'clock. So we really tried to be there as much of a full day as possible to try to get folks who have different work schedules, childcare schedules, to fit that into their day. So we did try to stay as long as we could. We also made those materials that we used in the open house available online. And we had about 80 people in attendance at the open house. And the format of it was we had large posters that had the goals and the recommendations listed. And we asked people to rank what they considered to be their high priority areas. So that's in part how we achieved these low, medium, high priority areas, was based on that community feedback. So it was a dot voting exercise where the community members ranked what they considered to be high priorities, medium priorities, and low priorities. And we also had then a box next to that where people, and post-it notes, so people were freehand commenting on, I think this should be amended to this, or I support this very much, or here's something else to consider. So we did receive a lot of open-ended feedback with our goals and recommendations. And like I said, we did do fairly substantial revisions to our goals and recommendations based on that feedback, and that was integral in helping us to establish our priority levels within the implementation charts.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Quick comment. I do think that the plan really does represent the broad values of our community. So thank you, as well as the community members that worked with you for over a year. But I just wanted to point out, Council received an email from our rec board this afternoon saying that not only do they support the plan, but this is where they see the intersections between our existing rec board, and here's the invitation that this is where they feel that they could really be useful in the following initiatives. And that to me really underscored the utility of the comprehensive plan, where we have now this document that is a living document that is a tool not only for this council but for future councils. And I hope that other boards, commission, community groups use this plan much like the rec board did, that sent us this really comprehensive response and action.
Thank you. Any other questions that I have? Okay. So I look at the last 10 pages of this document, and while the intro and the summary at the beginning are nice, if you're wondering what's going on in this community, the last 10 pages is a bulleted list that tells you the wide range of things that we have to be concerned about to keep this community viable, and how they're all interconnected, and how much our viability really depends on looking at it at a 50,000-foot view down to make sure that we're hitting all these. Reading some of the sort of high-level goals. Ensure municipal codes provide adequate standards and appropriate land uses within the borough. Sure, that sounds great. I'm curious as to how this plan differs from a comprehensive plan for another community. How are our values different than somewhere else? And how does it contrast? Otherwise, are these statements just sort of things everybody can agree on?
Sure. So there's a lot of overlap, I think, across all municipalities. I think there's something to be said that there are certainly phrases in here that you could pick any municipality in the county, in the state, in the country, and these would be applicable to them. They are just good planning practice, good governance practices. So it's not necessarily something that you need to reinvent over and over again. I think the real distinction at that point would be the specific implementation steps that are probably then more unique to Narberth and to the structure of Narberth than would be in a larger township, say in Western Montgomery County. So in that sense, yes, there is maybe some phrases in here, some broad level goals that could be applied to a number of other communities, and in fact, in some respects, do largely sound similar to those other broad level goals, but I think that, again, the distinction is those specific implementation steps, which were created with a very specific context in mind here, and what we need to do, what we would recommend to do in order to make that best management practices for the borough applicable to Narberth that wouldn't be applicable in some other context.
So, for example, under that, it says, explore how development regulations can be linked to the provision of affordable housing, transportation alternatives, and energy-efficient buildings. Just to make sure I understand what this document is for, I think everyone in this town would read that and say, yes, these things are important because we do have these shared values. But how we choose to implement that, that's sort of politics and policy. Mm-hmm. There are maybe some community members who think we should do this one way, and other people in the community think we should do it another. And that's the work that lies ahead of us, yes. Right? To understand how much, how far, who pays, when, all of those things.
Right.
And clearly there's no shortage of things to do.
Yes.
Okay. Hearing no other comments from council members, I would like to just take a moment and thank you, Ms. Dobbs, and also our professional staff who supported this effort by providing lots of documentation and finding documents that hadn't been looked at for a long time to make sure that they could be included. The Planning Commission and the specific members of the steering committee. Volunteers in our community who gave up nights and weekends to see this through. And I'd like to call out their names.
Great.
Todd Bressie, Miriam Shakow, Bill Bezak, Michelle Kondo, Maureen O'Leary, David Bordeaux, Jesse Lytle, and Erica Daniels. So thank you all to them. Many of you have seen council wrangle in the past couple months about our priorities. This is sort of an even higher level view, and there was a lot of wrangling that went on. But I think this will drive our whole community for 20 years. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll hand it back to you.
And with that, we will close this public hearing on the Narberth Borough Comprehensive Plan, and we will adjourn back into the public meeting where this plan is now in a position to be voted upon for adoption by the borough related.
All right, thank you. We will now move to public comment. This is an opportunity to make a comment on any topic that you would like to the borough. Go right ahead, George.
Hi, I'm George Mooseburner, 114 Conway Avenue, and I have questions and concerns about three very sort of real concrete things.
Yeah.
One is, if you heard my question before, is what's going on with the tennis courts? I asked this question in January, and Aaron, you and Sean conferred, and you said you would get back to me and to us. I have heard nothing. That's one. Two is, I'd like to ask about the streets of North Narberth, when they'll get repaved. In 2017, the gas company PECO came through and did North and South Narberth, cut holes in our street, did their job. In North Norworth, they left some temporary patches. South Norworth, they did a curb-to-curb complete repave. North Norworth was still waiting. So I'd like to know when that will get done and what the borough is doing to make sure it gets done. And the third one, even sort of more practical, is last week 2 large dumpsters appeared in the parking lot along with construction material. And if you park back there, take a look at it. And my understanding that those dumpsters belong to the borough, I think it's a terrible place to put them. It's right next to the library, the playground, the courts. And the summer's just starting and kids will be out there and climbing all over, and I think it's just a problem waiting to happen. So I'd like you to talk about those 3 issues.
Okay. We don't usually do question and response, but I think I can address the tennis courts. Originally, there was a plan for the Athletic Association to have them resurface. That plan did not proceed for complicated reasons. And I think council now is in a position where we're looking at the usage of our parks and all of the different activities and areas. And so I would say that right now there is no plan to do a resurfacing. They will remain as is. Regarding North Narberth Avenue, Mr. West, you can probably give a little bit more of an update.
Yeah, sure. So any of the repaving programs that we're looking to do, instead of what we did a couple of years ago and repaved all of South Narberth, we decided to take a contribution from both Aqua and Pico to give a boost to our capital fund. And we're going to be developing a repavement plan based upon the priorities of conditions of streets. If there are temporary patches along North Narberth that you could bring to our attention that need repair, please let us know.
Conway, Haverford.
Yep, and we will
They're all temporary.
Forward that to Pico. For dumpsters in the parking lot, that too is temporary at this time. This is an ongoing project to try to solve the trash problem behind downtown, the businesses in the municipal lot. Those dumpsters were up there. We're trying something different with that, and this is temporary location for them at the municipal lot.
Mr. Norbert, just going back to North Narberth Avenue.
No, not North Narberth.
I'm sorry,
North Narberth in general.
Narberth. I'm reading my notes. To the paving of the roads. If there, as part of the temporary repair, there's a pothole. That is what Mr. West is referring to. But in terms of when these roads will be completely repaved, we are working on a comprehensive paving program. So I would say it is possible there could be paving this season, but nothing has yet been decided.
So you decided to let Pico off the hook because that was their
No,
responsibility?
we took the money and we hold the money and we look at how we can best spend that money to the repair of our overall infrastructure rather than applying it directly to the street, each street that was dug up during the utility work. That's the plan. Any other public comment?
Excuse me, John Kelly, 35 North Norbert. Excuse me. I'm just trying to get an update on the bridge and the inspection and what's going to happen with that.
Sure. We have a date. I believe it is April 22nd or 23rd.
Could be.
That's what I was told. That is when the inspection will happen.
Yeah.
The report will take a few days after that to come together. I would imagine we will have information for our May 1st meeting.
We're hoping.
To make a decision, and we're applying the necessary pressure.
It is certainly not predicated on our inspection. Could you tell the public who we're waiting on to fulfill that obligation of inspection?
Right.
PennDOT.
It's PennDOT.
PennDOT.
All right. Any other public comment? Questions? Yes, Mr. Little.
Jesse Little, 108 South Norbert Ave. Cindy, thank you for your comment about the rec board. I should have thought to send an email like that from the Environmental Advisory Council about the comprehensive plan, which for us, we're just developing our agenda, is incredibly helpful as an organizing tool. So both the mechanism of having a plan is, we can't be there fast enough, but also the substance of it. So my EAC colleagues and I have been reviewing the draft as it's evolved. We're completely supportive of all of the environmental attributes of the plan and can't wait to get to work. So I just wanted to put my plug in for that dimension of the plan. And I don't know if there's a comment allowed before you get to action item 8G.
Now is the time for all comment.
My son and I made this sign. We've been waiting a long time for this. So we think we're ready for 100% renewable energy in Norbert. And as an EAC member, I'm excited to work on that. As a citizen, my family thinks it's the most important thing you could possibly do. So thank you for taking on this question.
Here, here.
Any other public comment?
Just,
Yes, Ms. Lammer.
Hi, Jennifer Lammer, Windsor Avenue. Question, I don't know if this is the appropriate place or not. Where does it stand with the building plans for the Bricklands and Cadence site? And is there going to be an effort a little bit better than communication has been to allow residents to be involved?
I can tell you that those building plans are by right. So there's a very...
What does that mean?
That means that the plan as submitted, they have the right to build the building they propose to build. There are not conditions, as was the case with 114 Forest, where it went through a process where they come to council and there can be some negotiation on certain issues. This is much more, I don't know, Mr. Walco, maybe you can use better legal language or non-legal language. That's why I turned to the lawyer.
We have, presuming we have a zoning code and a subdivision land development code. They are fulfilling all requirements of that code with what they're building. So there isn't any, if council went away from that, we're not following our own laws. And that's obviously a problem. So are you referring to the actual structures themselves or the building operations?
No, the actual structures.
All right, so the structures themselves, as they are proposed, are in line with what our codes provide. Presumably. I mean, they still will be going through inspection processes to make sure that the stormwater meets our stormwater standards.
So would they go through planning commission at
They will.
this point or not?
Have we approved the draft plan for this?
I don't think so. I think we looked at a preliminary sketch.
So they certainly have additional reviews that they need to go through. I can't recall off the top of my head whether they had a draft plan approval or not. But really the preliminary plan approval is the level where you really start to get into an early level of detail for matters such as stormwater. We amended our code at the recommendation of the Planning Commission actually to require an earlier submission of the elevations, so people could see sort of not just the plan on a piece of paper in a box, which is I think why we're here today and able to see what this building may look like. But it still has to go through the plan approval process. It still has to at least go through the preliminary plan approval process and then through a final land development plan approval process. But again, as it's presented now, for the way that it looks, you know, how far back it is from the street, how tall it is, you know, the exterior, the way that it lines the sidewalks, that is in line with the code. That's my understanding. Our engineers will look at it and our experts will look at it, and we'll go through planning commission review moving forward as well.
I'll clarify maybe a little bit further, which is to say these review processes, and it's multi-stage and increasing levels of detail as we move along. It's really, you're looking at checklists. Does Section A comply with Section A of the code? Does Section B comply with Section B of the code? There's not a lot of room for sort of discretion or personal preference or even political preference. As long as it is in compliance with the code, then it is legally permissible. And that's the process that we'll be moving through. Even when it comes to council, say for a vote to approve a preliminary sketch plan or a development plan, it's an administrative approval, which is to say our professional staff has reviewed all of the details and says that they are within compliance of the code. And I think that's a common misperception when some of these items come to us and we vote yes, that somehow we all like, I mean, we all have our personal opinions, but there is a legal process here, and that is different for certain kinds of developments where we do have more discretion, and that's the conditional use process, but that is not the case for these two developments that you asked about.
Well, I guess my other comment would be that I think the new form-based code that a lot of us were hopeful would keep the massive building that occurred just before it went in place of some of the residential houses that were sandwiched in properties. It seems very helpful to developers and not great for keeping a setback. And the Haverford is going to be a very different street. I'm all for sort of concentrated living situations, and then hopefully you have some open space to make up for that. But on Caden's site, the view is going to be, all of a sudden now, we're going corner to corner construction right up to the sidewalk. Whereas up until now, we've had that nice setback, even though it's macadam, there's airspace. And even on Ricklands, we had that swath of greenery and parking lot, and now we're gonna have building sidewalk to sidewalk. And I think a lot of residents don't realize the impact that that's gonna have on really changing what downtown Norworth is to experience. And I think it's a shame. We've lost an opportunity to keep some of that openness of our downtown and still encourage building. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comment? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Tamara Clements from Anthwin Road. I'm actually Norbert. I'm 4 houses off Norbert on Oak. I came tonight because I'm so excited about the resolution for 100% renewable energy. I feel, living here for 30 years, that we families here in Norbert, Marion Station, we want to set good examples for our kids, and we can't be silent on this crisis anymore. And I think that this is the way that we tell PICO. We don't want all this infrastructure being built, all these gas plants in the city. All these children are suffering from asthma. There's bad air, water, and land. And when we go towards renewables, we totally turn that around.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? All right, hearing none, we will move to action items 8A. Councilor Ricketts.
I move the Borough Council approve the minutes of the March 6, 2019 workshop meeting and March 20, 2019 business meeting of Borough Council.
Is there a second?
Second that.
All in favor, or any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 8B.
I move that Borough Council approve the schedule of bills of the general highways, sewer, and solid waste funds and authorize the Borough Manager to pay all bills.
Any discussion, or is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Sorry about that.
Aye.
Back to you.
I move the Borough Council adopt Resolution 2019-009, approving the preliminary plan for the property located at 114 Forest Ave, per the attachment.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
All right, seconded. Let's have a discussion. Who would like to start that discussion?
We'll turn to Mr. Walker.
So this is a resolution, a motion to adopt a resolution for the preliminary plan approval. And as we just discussed, the land development process goes through stages. In this one, there was an additional conditional use hearing, which was granted with conditions that were established by council. They then came in with their plan, their first draft sketch plan, which essentially was the lines and very early levels of what would be built. That plan was reviewed by our experts, our staff, was found to be in compliance with the code to that level of detail that was required in our subdivision and land development ordinance for the sketch plan. Waivers were granted at that time upon the recommendations of, I believe, the commission and our experts. So that approval has been granted, and that is done. The next step, then, after that draft sketch plan was approved, was they submitted the preliminary plan, which was a plan with additional level of detail as required by our code, notably stormwater details. I believe landscaping details were included in that as well. And as such, this preliminary plan went through an additional level of reviews. It was reviewed by the Norworth Planning Commission, and I believe after the Norworth Planning Commission reviewed the plan, they did catch some issues regarding the zoning, which were then corrected, and a revised preliminary plan was submitted after the Planning Commission to sort of meet some of those recommendations and catches. It was reviewed by the Shade Tree Commission. It was reviewed by our fire marshal, which was a requirement from the conditional use. It was reviewed by our engineer at Benoni, the Montgomery County Planning Commission as well, Yerkes, in order to, again, see if it satisfies all of the requirements for the code at this level of preliminary plan, because again, they may have to come back or they will have to submit a final plan. There were comments that were made by a number of these reviewing and recommending bodies. They will have to comply with all those comments when they make additional revisions to the plan for the final plan. That's a condition of the approval today. But the plan itself still remains the same as you, council, saw it at the conditional use hearing. Again, with now more established features for stormwater, and I believe there is now on the Forest Avenue side a sort of a overhang porch over the entranceway, which again was something that would be required by our code. So at this point in time, they're looking for approval through the municipality's planning code, which again is required to go through the process for this preliminary plan. The only waiver that is requested and was recommended to be granted by the Montgomery County Planning Commission and through our borough engineer was sort of a slight waiver regarding the stormwater infiltration facilities needing to drain within 96 hours. My understanding after speaking with Benoni, that is I think almost impossible to do on this site. In lieu of that, it was recommended by our engineer, and it's a condition of that waiver, that they instead provide amended soils in all new lawn areas, which allows for improved stormwater retention and infiltration across those amended soil areas. What amended soil areas really are is any grass that they are putting in, instead of it being, you know, a foot worth of grass, it's going to be, I don't know, 3 feet, if not more, worth of soils to again provide for a natural infiltration, which that would have to be maintained as a stormwater feature for the site. So again, I don't know the exact numbers, but that's sort of the idea of it. Again, they have to comply with all recommendations. They still have to comply with all the conditions for the conditional use hearing that were imposed. They are going to have to file a new deed to consolidate the lots, as was the recommendations. And if it does proceed to the final plan, and then that final plan is approved, we will have to do a land development agreement. They'll have to post financial security. In that land development agreement, we'll be able to address some of the issues I know the community was concerned about, as far as making sure that that Forest Avenue and Windsor Avenue both remain open for pedestrian access, crossings, and for vehicle access. We know that's important to the downtown, as well as issues as far as storing of construction materials. In fact, there's a condition of this approval that during that construction that they have to make sure that all dirt and dust remain on the site, that the construction materials, construction vehicles aren't parked in public areas unless the borough approves of that. And again, ensuring safe traffic. Because I think the borough is aware that this would possibly need to be coordinated with the other projects that could be approved. And if they do get approved, we're going to have to coordinate all of that to make sure that those areas remain open and business friendly. So that is the resolution summarized. The applicant is here with Mr. Yan, the engineer, if there are any sort of technical questions. Again, it was my understanding they are willing to comply with all of our engineers' review comments, all of the shade tree comments that came up. The fire marshal comments were only essentially, hey, they have to follow all of the building codes that are established, but there are no other errors, which of course they would have to do anyways.
Mr. Walker, we received a letter from Mr. Bressi, in charge of our planning commission, and a lengthy letter, and I hope you received it as well?
I'm not sure I did.
Oh, well.
Is it today or recently?
It was
Today, this morning.
This morning. So,
Just a moment.
No,
Sure.
Tuesday, 8:51 PM.
Tuesday, 8:51.
4/16.
I got one this morning.
The Outlook has been like chunky.
Skip, yeah, and then
Like I didn't get
It just goes
anything,
into
then I got
detail.
2 days worth of
Oh,
emails.
this one.
So I'm not sure if it's my side or their side.
I don't see one on there.
just says they met,
This is updated.
and their recommendations in blue.
All right, so that was the portico requirement that this had met.
It's weird, it does say Tuesday, and I got it today, though.
That's what happened, yeah.
I believe you sent it. It's gotta be an email issue.
The Outlook network's all messed
Yeah,
up.
it happened to me. and
There's
then-
no way it would have an earlier date if you didn't send it in that date.
That's right.
It was all messed up.
All right, so we sent it out Tuesday.
So the way this,
So we're reading through the letter here, and this is the first one where NPC makes a recommendation.
I see it as reading two recommendations, which were in the, I believe, the March letter as well. The one where it says, in creating the portico, the applicant has met the frontage requirement of the code. So again, that portico was added because the planning commission doing a great job realized, hey, this is a requirement of the code. And the applicants said, yes, I guess you're right. And then they put in that portico requirement. The encroachment issue was something that was discussed previously. As you recall, the encroachment was an issue that council was aware of going back to the conditional use hearing. It was discussed at the conditional use hearing. And as a result of that encroachment, council actually imposed significant conditions upon this slight encroachment into the right-of-way, which essentially is just walls and parts of the step that would go up to the stoops, that they need to maintain those areas, leave them open for the public, that if we needed to have those demolished, they would have to do so at their costs, and that there will be a declaration filed against the property that will keep those conditions in perpetuity with the property. I believe at that hearing it was also discussed, and they testified, because there was an issue as to, well, what if you have to remove the steps? What are you going to do? And the applicant testified, or the applicant engineer or architect said, well, then these would not be entryways anymore. They would then be made into balconies if we really needed to do that. And there are additional entryways through inside the building through those spaces, so they thought that they could do that. That encroachment again was known to the I think Norbert Planning Commission and Council when it was approved and recommended that the conditional use be approved. Knowing that, it was then appeared on the sketch plan resolution, because again we're dealing with lines, and that line in the encroachment was present on the sketch plan resolution. Council approved that plan. That line has not moved. So the next step is they get more detail about what's behind that line. I don't believe that council is in a position to follow that recommendation at this time, now that it has approved the prior plan with the encroachment, which again was done at the commission's recommendation. We can't just take that away now that they've built off of that prior approval. So although I understand the planning commission's concerns, and I think it was, is this really going to be enforceable? It's my opinion that it is enforceable, and that would, following that recommendation, would put council in a tedious position.
There's another page.
Yeah, I'll pull it.
Okay.
We're moving to that next.
Walk.
Yeah, and any recommendations regarding the zoning officer, the borough engineer to do, I mean, that's up to the council to direct their staff to do. If they don't conform with the code, they have to conform with the code.
So I have a question on that one.
On which one, I'm sorry?
The conforming with the code.
Thank you.
Actually, why don't you finish them and then I'll tie those, my
Yeah,
comments
and then the
together.
encroachment of the planters in the right-of-way, the amount of paving in front of the portico, the amount of paving in front of the portico, and the configuration of the front facade do not fit the spirit of Norbert's zoning code. And I'm not sure, that's not a legal conclusion. So I'm not the planner, so I'm not sure how to respond to that. But again, as far as legal plans have been submitted, the issues as far as the front facade configurations and the planters and the rights of way have already been approved.
Okay, so my question on the last two walls.
But I could say the amount of paving in front of the portico, I'm not sure if they're recommending that there be additional lawn areas there or not, but the setbacks are established and actually were drafted as part of the commission for this project. So, I mean, if there is, and obviously there's a condition that they put the sidewalks, I think no less than 6 feet there as well. So again, I'm again not sure what they would prefer to have.
Well, I believe Mr. Bresci is here. So in the interest of clarity, could I ask what does the Planning Commission mean regarding the wall and design element of your letter?
Fair point.
Yeah.
Zoning, we didn't notice this in the preliminary plan because we had the bigger issue of what the frontage on Fire Staffing was. So since we received the revised, and in the first draft of the preliminary plan. And so in this month when we received the revised preliminary draft plan, we could accurately assess the frontage of the building to ensure it conformed the code, which it does. We began to look at all the other aspects of that frontage of the building to ensure that they conform with the code as well, not just the portico. And one of the elements of the design is a series of walls. Maybe some of them are used to separate a private terrace from the green strip next to the sidewalk. And some of them are used to mediate grade changes where there are service entrances to the building. And the code does permit walls in the front setback, that's fine. But it has permittable dimensions, heights, essentially. And it was we thought that some of the walls appeared to be too high, higher than our code allows. However, the drawings that the applicant submitted were not really clear. It was virtually impossible to tell from the drawings where the walls were, how high they were. And so we felt that the prudent course of action would be to have the applicant prepare clear drawings that showed the height of the walls, that could demonstrate that the walls are in conformity with the code. So that's what that means.
Okay. And then regarding the design element, encroachment of the planters in the right of way.
You know, as both you and Mr. Walker have said, there are limits to what we can accomplish through zoning. This is a significant development in the town, and even though there are limits to what we can do legally, we often at the Planning Commission do try to talk about other issues to see if we can persuade applicants to consider more of the context of the town. The encroachments have always been a concern. In our first letter, in the at the tentative phase, we actually encouraged the applicant to meet with the zoning officer, the engineer, us, the staff, to work out some better design solutions. We believe still that there are better ways to design that facade that would not require an encroachment. And quite frankly, each time we raise the question, we're rebuffed at the commission. So we thought that that's why we keep raising the issue. So what that means is we think there are ways to solve the problems that the applicant has without the borough giving up part of its right-of-way. So even though you have the condition in place, and even though the applicant has agreed, that shouldn't really stop you from looking for a better solution. Yes, as a fallback, that is in place, but I don't see why it's not possible to continue looking for a better solution that's a design solution that doesn't require the building to be in the right way.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Walker, do you have any follow-up?
I mean, the applicant can always, if they wanted to, change their design in any way. I mean, my recollection was that they proposed alternatively sort of flat walls, and that council didn't like the way that looked, which is why it was preferred to have it this way. Again, if there was something, I can't imagine the applicant would like to be in the right of way with the requirements that would be put on them through this declaration that has to be filed, but they're certainly able to try to make something that works better. Specifically, council would like to prove that as well. But we granted approval as is, and based upon the municipality planning code and the planning process, unless they were to come up with a different plan that changes what we previously approved, we're not able to just say, well, never mind, all of the time and money you spent to develop this plan further based upon our approvals, you have to throw that out. I mean, the planning process is there for us as council to make sure things are done correctly, but it's under the MPC, it's also for the applicant in order to have a plan developed.
One more point of information, and then Gigi, and then Bob.
And actually, to address the second point, if the walls do not meet our code requirements, they would have to meet our code requirements. And our engineers are going to be looking at those aspects to ensure that they fulfill our code requirements. So unless they're asking for a waiver, which they have not asked.
So even if council were to say, approve this preliminary plan, and then later it would turn out through more detail that these walls were out of compliance, we have not granted an authorization or a waiver for the walls to be out of
unless we know that these don't comply.
Right.
And we're overlooking that, and quite frankly, they probably would like to have a waiver from us for that. No, we're not committing ourselves to a code violation.
But if we state here that our belief is that the walls are in compliance, and we can always ask the developer.
We can.
Right, then we're not committing an error of omission here by moving forward at this point. All right, Jeannie.
I have two questions. John, you brought up the stormwater request that was made, the waiver that was requested. And the Planning Commission did not make a recommendation, as Mr. Bressi states here. And you did refer to the fact that 96 hours for the rate and volume of the stormwater. Now, we all know that I've been saying stormwater for 5 years, so here we go. Tell me what has been proposed, if you can, that makes a waiver possible for this location within, or as close to the 96 hours as we can get, I suppose, and meeting the standards that are in the code. What has been recommended? If there is a partial waiver, some kind of waiver given, then please explain to me what that is, how it is, and what that means to the buildings surrounding this property.
I'm going to defer to the engineer's review letter who addressed this waiver. I'm trying to find it right now. It's John, if you can.
Can I actually ask? Can I ask a question to sort of back up to a higher level, and then I think John will have a chance to drill down to answer your question.
I have one more.
Is the stormwater runoff as calculated with this development as proposed greater or less than what currently exists on the site? I don't know if you have the answer to that question.
Good evening, my name is Christian, I'm the engineer for the project. So because there's more impervious proposed than there is existing, there would be more stormwater.
Thank you. And my next question, while Mr. Walko's reviewing, is that in Mr. Bressi's letter, he talks about design documentation. And so under this motion tonight, it says preliminary plan. Mr. Bressi brings out the point that some of the documents submitted were illegible, and they were submitted with obscure critical details, obscured critical details, and that the building may or may not comply. That I have a deep concern if I'm going to vote for a preliminary plan that the Planning Commission says they couldn't read the details, because I'm going to say it, because we've heard a little bit from our neighbors on Price Avenue about a detail that was missed and is now causing great pain to them and to us, and trying to work with that developer. I think the details are important, and I think we here are checks and balances, which is why we have a planning commission, which is why we have a review process, why Mr. Walker's here, Benoni's here, all those people are here, and that it's our job to say, oh, wait a minute, if we don't get a letter that says we couldn't see the details, because I'm telling you, as I was told, the details of that barrier on Price Avenue was included in the documents, but it didn't say, maybe it should have said, enchanting, delightful looking stone barriers so that no car would drive into Ken's house, and that he wouldn't have headlights in his living room, and that we, of course, would be having a different conversation had it said something different in the details of that document, which is what I think Mr. Bressi and others are trying to bring to our attention, that the devil and the glory are in the details.
John, do you...
I did follow up with the engineer, and the engineer recommends that this waiver be approved. And I think it's the engineer's position that you have waivers because sometimes the code doesn't apply to all situations. And you don't need to have all requirements at all times. And based upon this site, this was a reasonable waiver to be granted. And again, it was his recommendation to also put in, as sort of a substitute, the amended soils to sort of address that need.
I think it'd be helpful just to define waiver because, it sounds like we're waiving some requirement and it may mean something different to the engineer who's recommending waiver. So can you say, why does the engineer recommend waiver? Like what? Is it because there's nothing else that can be done with the stormwater? Is it because we have no other, there are no other options?
The engineers recommend that waivers be granted when they review the plans and they say this isn't needed.
It's not needed.
It's not needed.
So the waiver
for
is
this
the engineer saying this is not needed.
I would hope so. Otherwise, you find yourself a better engineer. But but engineers are saying, and it's not only if it's not possible, but if it was not possible, but we should have it. Otherwise, it would cause a danger. They probably wouldn't approve it. But if it's not needed, and it could create some sort of a hardship, or if it's impossible, the engineer would say, yes, this doesn't fulfill this particular requirement of our code, but in his opinion, it doesn't need to be met. So then it comes up to council to say, hey, do we want to grant a waiver saying that this particular provision in our stormwater ordinance does not need to be met for this site? So and again, that isn't something that I'm an expert to know, and I don't know if you are, which is why I rely on our engineer to make those decisions.
Mr. Yon, could you speak as a point of information to the depth of soil replacement that is expected to take place in the green areas?
And also to the soil.
Yes, so for the amended soils, essentially during construction lots of times the way that contractors like to do it is they go out and they just compact the ground and basically eliminate all of its ability to infiltrate. And so when you use, and they use as little amount of topsoil as possible, which might be say 4 inches or so. With amended soils, they're required to scarify the surface, which is, kind of take their excavator and kind of scrape it so that it loosens it up a little bit, and then they put some amended soils which are not on-site soils, which in this case the on-site soils were poor. They're from a company that would supply them with a certain mixture that would provide more infiltration capabilities and just storage volume in there. And so then you first put a layer of that in, you mix it up with the existing, and then you put another layer of that on top. So it's not really a whole lot more depth. It might go from 4 inches to say 8 inches total. It's not that it's a really large amount, but it's making the surface of it, instead of being really compact that contractors like to do, is it's allowing it to, it's giving it some extra storage, which is better for both the stormwater runoff, but also the vegetation that's trying to grow there.
And that has to be maintained as part of the DEP requirements will require you to maintain that as a stormwater facility, correct?
Right, any of the Borough Code has operation and maintenance requirements, and basically any BMP would have to be maintained, and the amended soils would be considered one of those BMPs, a best management practice.
What is the need for a waiver for the infiltration?
So, whenever we develop a site or start to do the stormwater design for a site, one of the first things we do are called infiltration tests, where just to really break it down, they dig a hole, they pour water in it, and they see how fast it drains. Right? They also look for limiting zones, which might be a high water table or rock, where at some point, the water just isn't going to go down in that location because the water table is there. You can't infiltrate anymore where the water table is. In this case, they didn't find the rock or the water table, but what they found is when they did the infiltration test, the results varied from 0.12 inches in an hour. That was from 0.039 inches in an hour to 0.2 inches in an hour. That was the range. It was so small, it was almost negligible. And so in the City of Philadelphia Code, I believe anything below 0.4 is considered infeasible. It's just so low that it doesn't work. So, what you would get from that when the earth engineering report, the geotechnical engineer says it's infeasible, you think, okay, I can't infiltrate here. Instead of asking for a waiver of the infiltration volume, what we did is we provided the volume in the bottom of the system, and instead asked for a waiver of the drain time. So, look, we're giving you the volume, and maybe in the heat of summer you'll get it to drain a little faster. But basically it's supposed to drain in 4 days. If you just use the straight measured rate, it would take 17 days to drain. If you use the safety factor of 2, which you're supposed to use, then it would take a little over 30 days to drain. So we're really nowhere close to that 4 days, and like I said with the City of Philadelphia Code, they'd call it, you wouldn't be allowed to use it. They would say this is a site that's not feasible, but we're giving the volume there so that it can work sometimes, certainly when there's more of a gap between storms. And then just to give a little more background, when I got the engineer's letter, I called him, we talked about it a little bit, talked about how we had some amended soils around an inlet to help treat some of the water that drained into the inlet, and he asked for more amended soils. As part of the waiver conversation, and so we did that. We agreed to put in more amended soils. We also talked about, the type of testing that was done, basically because the site is, I think, over 70% impervious right now, that it's difficult to get a backhoe out there and really dig a big hole and see. So instead they use what's called a borehole test, where they bore it down, they take the soils out and measure. And so we agreed that during construction that we would do additional testing to see if using a different method that maybe it would be more feasible, which would just reduce the amount of drawdown time. But like I said, the volume's there, so it's going.
But in saying the volume is there, you're meaning it is retained in an underground detention basin?
Correct. So
it's not going to be on the surface.
Correct. The underground system, and I don't know off the top of my head how deep it is, but let's say that it's 6 feet deep. The bottom 2.5 feet, the only way that it can get out is by infiltrating. Now, I also talked to the township or the borough engineer about a seminar I had just gone to a few weeks ago where they suggested putting an under drain underneath this area. It's called an internal water storage. Is kind of the new language they use now. You put an under drain underneath it. You turn the outlet up to go out, so that whenever it does rain, and the water gets filled up, it pushes that water out and back around. And there are water quality benefits from having that water sit in there, and whatever fertilizers or whatever might be in there. By it being in the water and being like starved of oxygen, you treat some of it. Now, not everything, but there are water quality benefits to that, and that's part of a new thing that DEP is working on right now, and they don't have a final version of. So that was another thing we talked about doing.
And are there any basins or anything underground controlling stormwater on that site right now?
Not that I'm aware of. There are 2 inlets that collect the water and pipe it directly to the pipe in the street, but I'm not aware of any systems.
How much would it have to rain for that collection basin to start pushing stormwater out into the street, so it's flowing down the street?
So,
flowing down the street or
yeah,
flowing into the pipe?
flowing down the street, or flowing into the storm system.
So
basically getting into the Indian Creek directly. How many times in 50 years would that happen, where it's going directly without sitting there and infiltrating slowly through the earth? How often would it actually overflow and go straight into the stream?
So the code regulates the amount of water that needs to be infiltrated and then the rate that it leaves the site.
Right.
And so the amount that needs to be infiltrated, that's the volume we have. So in the routing calculations, I'm assuming that water is always in there. And so essentially, as soon as it rains, the calculations show that it's going right out. And so there are controls in the system to reduce the flow and restrict it so that it's less than the pre-development rates. So even if that whole volume is totally full, then the water that goes into the system is slowed down and leaves the site slower than it did pre-development. And so any infiltration volume you get will just further reduce the rate that the water leaves the site.
And I really appreciate you educating us on this, because there's so many residents who are concerned about, with new development, that there's going to be increased load on our storm sewer, and that it's going to negatively impact the downstream of the Indian Creek and the Cops Creek watershed. And I think you're reassuring us that actually even that this building's going to perform better than the current parking lots and building that are on the site. Is that correct?
In terms of rates, yes.
Yeah, in terms of rates, in terms of what's going downstream.
When I asked that question earlier, I think you gave the answer sort of based on a calculation of impervious surface, but in terms of the sort of the performance of the outflow to the community, it is improved from the current situation.
That's correct.
Quick question, with the amended soils that allow better infiltration, over time, do those soils compact and do they have to be maintained, and how does that work?
They can be compacted if you have heavy lawn equipment going over it.
But if there's not heavy equipment going over it, just due to the course of nature, do they compact over time?
A little bit, yes. I mean, they can also have, sediment or debris can fill those voids a little bit.
So how do you account for that? How do you manage that so it doesn't compact too much over time and reduce its efficiency?
So part of the maintenance that you'd want to do is, and so lots of people want to talk about the maintenance of the stormwater being present to keep the leaves and debris clean from there. For the amended soils, they're really doing some of that treatment for you. So where you want to keep the they call it total suspended solids, or the silt, right, leaving the site. You want to reduce how much leaves the site, and so the amended soils help do that by giving that extra porosity and void space there. And so it's more that the amended soils are helping you do the treatment, and so the amended soils just might have to be replaced over time. Okay. It's not as much that you can not allow that to happen to the amended soils.
But periodically it has to be replaced and. Yeah.
Some type of maintenance. They have...
and you'll be required to do that under a maintenance agreement with the borough, as the Pennsylvania DEP would require you to do, because you're maintaining this as a stormwater facility.
Yes.
Correct? And part of along with the final plan, if it's approved and then filed, they also have to file a declaration against the property stating that they will maintain all of the stormwater facilities, whether it's the amended soils or these underground basins that they're talking about. And if they don't maintain it, we as the borough could go in and do it and then lien the property for any payments.
Okay.
And they do have, I think every 3 years or so, their reports are provided that they have inspection
Great.
To all of the BMPs or stormwater facilities.
Okay, thank you.
I'm still not.
Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Well, no, I'm finished with the stormwater question, but I want to come back to the.
Well, okay, if anybody else has any other stormwater questions, let's do that now, and then we'll move to the next topic.
So here's the
Councilor
question,
Richards.
thank you for that information. If council remains unhappy with the waiver, granting the waiver, could we consider saying, since there's nothing more that you can reasonably do at the existing site, would you support rainwater, stormwater management at another location in the borough?
I'll punt that first to Mr. Walker. Is that something that we can ask for?
I think that would need to be a very detailed, careful conversation to have. We'd have to be very careful with this. I think the law would require us to say that is related to the issue that's being created with this site.
Okay.
All right.
So if that could be established, potentially, but otherwise we can't just say do a basin in the park across,
Right.
on the other side of town.
Okay.
No, that it's not be done.
But it is an idea that could be done with a hypothetical development, even if it's a by right development somewhere in the borough. If they're not able to achieve their stormwater requirements.
There has to be a nexus to that site.
Okay.
Yeah. Or it often makes it easier if there's something that could be done better on that site. Again, that's what we're trying to do with the amended soils. It's, well, I can't do this, but we're going to make them do this, although it's really not required by the code. Now, for example, if they were required to put on 10 street trees and they couldn't do 10, they could always volunteer, say, well, we'll put 2 in the park, or we'll put 2 somewhere else on the site. If they wanted to offer that in exchange for a waiver, they can. Stormwater is a little bit harder because just the nature of engineering for stormwater.
Got it.
Rob, was yours a?
Yeah, this is stormwater related. When Shade Tree Commission met with you, we discussed kind of planting the trees in a way that would allow for more absorption and amended soils. So is that part of the soil amendment plan that you're discussing here, or would that be?
That wasn't really, so I think what the borough engineer asked for was in all lawn areas would be amended soils. I think what Shade Tree asked for was, I think the tree grates were shown as maybe 3 by 3, and they recommended, well, could they be 6 by 3, or could they be something larger?
Right.
To allow more area for water to infiltrate, or use infiltrate even though I know that it's unlikely to happen here. For water to get in there so that the tree roots can soak it up and use it. And they also talked about some type of maybe call it more of a structural soil, because it while you want to give it some extra void space for water to be in there, it does need to be strong enough to support the sidewalk. But we talked about maybe there would be some structural soil that expanded out beyond those tree grates so that the roots could expand out there. But that's a little different than the amended soil conversation.
But it would allow for the tree roots to grow more freely and potentially more water absorption through the trees.
Correct.
Any other water questions? All right, back to Bob.
Yeah, mine's not engineering related. In fact, I'd like to have a conversation that's decidedly not legal. And I understand that we're here to
not legal or not legally oriented.
I'm not a lawyer. That I'm not going to be speaking in terms of like legal principles. I'm speaking just as a member of this community who's elected to council, and about who we are as a community. And I just want to share this with other council members. What I'm aware of is that we've got a planning commission who basically these members wrote this participated with the county in writing this zoning ordinance for many years, and they're still members of this commission. And they're concerned about zoning review, and they're concerned about a conditional use process that we have a legal obligation to perform. And they're saying to us, this group of people, in fact, it was a 4-to-1 vote. Cornwell abstained, but Bressie, Boyce, Brower, and Spear all basically said that they did not feel that there's some of the details or some of the conditions, the planters, the paving in front of the portico, the configuration of the front facade, they're saying that these don't fit to them the spirit of Narberth's zoning. And now I understand that that's probably not a legally binding reason that we should vote no on this, because it's probably, maybe it wouldn't hold up in a court, right?
I'd rather not comment.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a no.
I'll nod for you, Bob.
Well,
You're
no,
on the
I'm just saying that I understand, but I do think it's the Planning Commission's right to express for us and for our neighbors that they feel there's something going on here that doesn't feel quite right to them, and they're asking for some things. So they're asking for drawings they can read. They're asking for a conversation with the zoning officer about whether or not these conditions are compliant or not. Now, it's true that the zoning officer can give the applicant, because we hire the zoning officer, can give the applicant approvals on zoning conditions. That's their job. The zoning officer's doing their job. But it's also true that the zoning officer can communicate with the Planning Commission and say, here's why we're approving this, and help the Planning Commission understand and relate to the project that they're charged with providing us conditional use recommendations on. So I'm not comfortable at this moment, just as a member of this community, just sitting, pretending that they're not concerned. Okay, I think I hear they're concerned. And I think that it's important for us to address this concern now and not let it kick it down the road to the next project. The next time there's a conditional use project process going on and the Planning Commission's making us, because we're counting upon our Planning Commission to provide us with appropriate recommendations on these conditional use conditions.
Yeah.
So what do we do? That's my question. What do we?
Well,
I want to say to other council members, what do we do?
So,
and I'm aware that we actually have a couple weeks before we're actually required to approve this.
So,
Okay, go ahead, CJ.
So, how do we answer the question, that's brought to our attention that says, some of the documents submitted were not legible, and that they are obscuring critical details.
So can we see what documents
what do I do with
were
that?
recently submitted?
It's not about the facts.
I think that was
It's
my.
not about the facts. It's about how the Planning Commission perceives the facts.
And that's my
And that's
next
what I'm
move.
saying,
It's in everybody's interest here
Right.
that the Planning Commission, the developer, the Borough Council have a good working relationship, feel that there is trust and transparency.
Yep.
And I think what I've seen throughout this process is that we've had it, and all of a sudden there's a bit of a stumble. So I'd like to give the developer an opportunity to sort of, speak to this.
But they can speak forever to us about it. I don't think that's going to help.
Well,
I think we need to fix it with the Planning Commission.
Wait, well, we have the chair of the Planning Commission in the room here,
Thank you.
so all
Okay.
parties are here.
Okay.
Well, let me just, this is Bob Kagan. I just want to start and say one thing, and then I'll let Chris get into it, because I think there's a misperception about what couldn't be read at the Planning Commission. We can only deal with what the code is. And we understand, having had many meetings with the Planning Commission and separate meetings outside the planning process, that they may have some question as to the spirit as they perceive it. We can only deal with the code as it's given to us. And what we've tried to do is respond to the code as it's written. So with regard to, and I'll let Chris talk about what the confusion was with regard to the plans. And it wasn't the whole plans. It was one aspect of the plans which was addressed, but in a different fashion, which is the wall that I think is referred to in the letter.
Unfortunately, I wasn't at the planning commission meeting where they discussed this. My understanding is that there was confusion about the wall as shown on the renderings. There is essentially the garage level is here, and the first floor level is here, and Windsor Avenue, slopes from the intersection with Forest, and that's where the corner of the building is, and it slopes down to the entrance to the garage. And so there was an egress from the garage, say somewhere right here, that we had shown a wall to block that view. And so from the renderings, you can't really see that wall, because you see the soil in front of it, and it's really hiding the door behind it. And so I think that's where the confusion. Mr. Bresci, maybe you can help me because I wasn't there, but that's what I was told. What the confusion was. I mean, on the site plan, there is a top and bottom of wall elevation, and it's I believe it was 7 feet. And when the point was raised to me, and I looked in the code section, that does exceed the 3 feet that's allowable, and so we need to change that, and we will. The reason I didn't catch it the first time is because to me it wasn't a wall that you saw the face of. It was a wall that was hiding something else, and so to me they're a little different. In terms of if you're standing on the street and looking at something, seeing a 7-foot wall as opposed to a 7-foot wall hiding something else. But when I look back through the code after it's raised, that is something that we need to revise, and we will.
Are basement doors allowed in the front facade of a building? By the code?
I'm not aware of something that precludes a door.
Okay, because I'm hearing different opinions about that.
But
First of all, in terms of the drawings, it's true that the issue we're referring to is the wall, but the applicant's architect was there. The applicant's architect was guiding us through this conversation, and for 15 minutes we couldn't figure out that wall. I'm sorry you weren't there, Chris. You would have solved it apparently very quickly. The point is, and if what Mr. Young said is true, then the issue is moot, right? But the issue is to make sure the wall conforms with the code. We could not determine that day, but apparently this is much more clear than the information we got at our meeting. Now, the door, there's nothing in the code that would preclude them from putting a door there, just as there's nothing in the code that would preclude them from putting a stair tower in the front facade. But believe me, when we wrote that code, we never thought someone would put a stair tower on the front facade. It just didn't occur to us that someone would even do something like that on the front of a building. As you'll recall, we argued earlier on that Forest Avenue should be the front of the building because of all these other things that were happening. So yes, these things are not precluded by the code, but they are not in the spirit of what we expect on the front facade of a building in Norbert.
If I could just say one more thing about the door, in the solution to eliminate the wall, we would be moving the door to the side, because really, the reason the wall was there is because we didn't think it was appropriate to show the door, right? It was for a service door. So the solution that we came up with to fix the wall, and then once the wall's not there, the door is to have it come out the side. Now the planning commission hasn't seen yet because that's something we figured out after the planning commission meeting, but that
we're prepared to submit that for a final plan.
Correct.
Yeah. So could you speak to the stair tower issue that is now first brought up here?
So I'm the engineer, not the architect, so I can't. I guess the one thing I would say is that this is a corner lot, and so we do have two frontages, which does make it a little more difficult than a normal property. I'd like to leave it at that because I'm not the architect.
Can I just, let me,
Yes,
because I think I addressed that at the planning commission meeting. We have the good fortune and the bad fortune to be the first people to really come in and put a project against the code. And there may be, as a project of first impression, some things that are uncovered and discovered in the process that may not have been intended, or as Todd says, may have violated the spirit. But again, we're looking at the code, and that's really all we can do. So we appreciate the comments. Not saying whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but again, we're the first project. You may find things that that we can do that you may not want to do. You may find things that we can't do that you would like us to be able to do, and that's up to the council.
I have one more detailed question. It's my understanding that some members of the Planning Commission are having a problem with the paving in the corner at the portico, at the entranceway, because of the scale of it. And I mean, I look at it as a resident, someone who walks on Windsor Avenue. It is larger than, say, the entrance to the post office, which is a major public, in and out. So I'm just wondering if that's the kind of thing maybe the Planning Commission was asking is, could you give it another look? Is it really, why is it the scale that it is? Like, why is that integral to the design or to the function? It's, clearly it's not something that's dictated by our code, or I'd be making a legal point. I'm not making a legal point. I'm just making a point about a concern that they had. Yeah.
So from my perspective, again, I wasn't at the Planning Commission, so I didn't hear the recommendation, but so I saw the letter just tonight. It said about the scale, didn't say smaller, larger, whatever, but certainly from my perspective, it could be adjusted. Part of what we do have to comply with is we have the 25-foot setback, and so that paving is going to go 25 feet. Now, whether it should be 4 feet wide or 8 feet wide or 25 feet wide, that we can adjust. And maybe it would, I guess I don't want to throw out design options right now, but certainly the width of it we could adjust, and we can work with them to do that. I didn't have an opportunity to do that. I just received the letter.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Right, so I'm just going to ask John. We have the recommendation of the borough engineer that they have met the legal requirements for us to adopt this preliminary plan.
Because it is just a preliminary plan. And I don't mean to say that lightly, it's more than a draft plan. But again, they're going to be coming back with the final plan. One of those ordinance amendments that we made earlier this year was to actually require the applicants to submit these architectural elevations. If we hadn't done that, they wouldn't have even had to do this. And that was, I think, a good addition for the Planning Commission, because they wanted to have those tools to do it. So we're sort of ahead of the game when it comes to reviews of preliminary plans. There are still things that need to be done in order to comply with the engineer's letters or other review letters, and they said that they will comply, and it's an obligation that they comply. And then they're going to proceed to do what they need to do under our codes to fulfill the requirements of the final plans and undergo another round of reviews. And if council wants a wall instead of seeing a door, they could come and say, hey, give us a waiver from the wall requirement because we think a wall is better than you seeing a door. And you could say no, or yes, or they could just build to code.
Okay. So hearing no further discussion, we have a motion on the table. All in favor of adopting the preliminary plan for 114 Forest Avenue? Say aye. I hear nothing. We'll call the roll.
Vice President Tevin Moffett.
No.
Councilman McGreevy.
Yes.
Councilman Nixon.
No.
Councilwoman Rickards.
Yes.
Councilman Weisbord.
Yes.
Council President Mudrick.
Yes.
Yeses have it.
What happens, Gigi?
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to 8D.
Move the Borough Council adopt Ordinance 1015, an ordinance amending the Norworth Borough Code, Chapter 11, Fire Department, to add a new article, Volunteer Service Credit Program, to enact real estate tax credits for qualifying volunteer members of the Norworth Fire Company and Norworth Ambulance, and to establish administrative procedures for such credits.
Is there a second?
I'm going to lose my temper, and this is not good.
Is there a second?
Can you read it again?
Sorry.
The firefighter tax credit.
Oh, I second that.
All right, any discussion? We've discussed. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. 8E. So that's to you, Councilor Tevlin.
It's actually Mr. McGreevy.
Yeah, I have that one.
Oh, okay.
I move that Borough Council adopt Resolution 2019-010, establishing guidelines volunteer service credit programs per the attached document. So this lays out the credits program for how people can obtain the tax credit.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on this? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. 8F.
Okay, F, I move the Borough Council adopt Resolution 2019-010, adopting Norworth 2040, the Norworth Borough Comprehensive Plan.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? We had a hearing, we did a lot of discussion, all in favor?
Councilor,
you
if
have
I may,
something? Go
I
ahead.
do.
Sorry.
This is a week of vacation for public school parents, and then a lot of folks are out of town. This is also the week where spring holidays occur, and maybe we didn't realize that when we came back and said, oh, we should do this right away. I don't think enough people in the public have reviewed it. When I had my neighbor saying, wait a minute, it was like 150 pages, and I'm going to be in the car. I would say I don't believe there's harm in delaying it to possibly allow the public to give them more time to look at the 150 pages. If someone could bring up what the harm would be, I might be swayed, but I ask you to delay it just one more month.
Would you like to move to table?
I would move to table.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor of tabling this motion with the plan to reintroduce it at the May 1st meeting?
Aye.
Thank you.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to open back up the public hearing for the Norworth Borough 2040 Comprehensive Plan. So we are going to adjourn the meeting. We are now back in the public hearing. At this time, I understand we need to continue to have this hearing. When would we like to next address the comprehensive plan?
May 1st.
So on May 1st at the workshop, this public hearing will be continued until that time, where if there's any additional feedback or plans, this will be the only public notice, legal public notice of this continuation of the hearing, unless it is again posted on the borough website. There will not be another legal publication in the newspaper because we are continuing the hearing that was published for today. And with that, we will close the hearing.
All right.
That is now continued.
Thank you. 8G. Infrastructure. That's you, Bob.
I move that the Borough Council adopt Resolution 2019-11, ready for 100%, the attached document, which is the ready for 100 resolution.
Okay.
I'll take a second.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you.
And I'd like to speak to it.
Please do.
I think the reasons for this motion are summarized easily by two letters that we got recently. One from Miriam Schaukow, who says that Norbert's Environmental Advisory Committee, the reasons, the Norbert's Environmental Advisory Council has recommended a resolution pledging the borough to transition to 100% clean renewable electricity by 2035 and 100% renewable energy for heat and transportation by 2050. Plymouth Township just passed a similar resolution yesterday. Cheltenham, Haverford, Radnor, and other local nearby townships are also entertaining this resolution as well. I actually think that this commitment is rather modest. I actually think we should amend it to read 2030 for 100% renewable, and I think we should strive to reach 100% transportation by 2040. That's my personal opinion. I don't think this moves fast enough.
Can you propose
The second reason that maybe I would accept a friendly amendment, but I want to also just say the second reason is summarized well by Amy Tchaikovsky-Feldman, who wrote to us that the United Nations Commission for global energy, these global energy concerns, says the reasons we must not act now to move clean energy are too numerous here to detail. She said the message from the last IPCC report, which is that UN conference, is that every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, every choice matters. And this is really an opportunity for us to weigh in with the global community and say this matters to us as well. But I would certainly accept a friendly amendment to amend the
Go for it.
goals.
Somebody do it. Yeah, I would make a friendly amendment. So that would be 2030 for clean electricity instead of 2035, and 2040 for clean transportation and heat instead of 2050.
That's the motion that's on the table.
Accept that, yeah.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. 8A.
Oh, that's cool. Good time.
All right. Moving to 8H, public safety. Councilor Tevlin Moffett.
Sure, this is a motion to advertise Ordinance 1016, amending Chapter 118 of privileged parking. So, council members, I move that Borough Council authorize the Borough Manager to advertise the Ordinance 1016, amending the Borough Code, Chapter 118, Vehicles and Traffic, Article 3, privileged parking to establish, I can't say it, permit parking for residential invitees, and to amend the definitions, permit, fee, violations, and penalty provisions.
I'll second that.
All right, great.
So here's the
On table.
background.
Go for it.
Here it is. We didn't have a provision that legally allowed us to have invited guests and pass parking or guest parking in the borough forever. And this allows that to happen, and it is certainly available to be read to the public, and it's just to be advertised, and council members did receive it, and we did have a conversation regarding this. And this came at the request of the mayor's office and council president to be done as quickly as possible. And I will say that in the, 60 days that we've been sort of talking about this, I have learned a lot about what's happening in the borough. This is not about your contractor, and this is not about just your child care services. This is about people in the borough who have overnight nursing care, or people who have someone come in while they go to work to be with an injured adult or a child, or private school parents. I got an email that said their children receive support services at home and this person comes to their door. So it's beyond what, I'll say for myself, I won't say for anybody else, what my original thinking was about this, that this is really a bigger piece that we need to consider and satisfy the members of the public this directly affects.
All right. Any other comments, questions?
I just wanted to thank Councilwoman Moffett for moving so quickly, and the office for moving quickly on this, and attempting to address the situation.
Certainly welcome.
I want to second the Mayor's thank you to Gigi, and especially because you took a kind of an unpopular little hot potato and you made something very good of it, and I appreciate that.
And I
had a lot of help. Thank you.
Also, thank you for your speediness, because you sort of found the time to get this across the table very, very quickly. It seems easy when you see it all written, but when it's not written, it's not so easy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. It's unanimous. Let's move on to 9A. Mr. Acting Manager, do you have a report?
Just that Mr. Metrick he's enjoying his time in Arizona. And I would just want to draw your attention to the blue painter's tape across the ladies' room on the second floor. We are well underway for renovating the holes in the walls. Paint is next this coming week. So we're looking to get the ladies' room back online by next week.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Mr. Solicitor, do you have anything?
No report.
Monthly reports have been filed. Any comments for the good of council?
I have.
Oh, you can go.
Wow,
Gigi.
this is
Yeah,
great.
mine are concise.
So sorry.
Now
Gigi
we'll
should go.
start with this and next
I can't say it's for the good.
Oh, okay.
Well, mine are puffy and positive.
Yes.
Start with Jim.
Yeah, you might recall a few months ago I announced that the Montgomery Early Learning Center here in Norworth received the top rating that a daycare can receive in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I just wanted to, on that note, give a shout out to our state rep, Mary Jo Daly. Recently gave up an entire afternoon and spent the day at the center learning about what they're doing and different studies they're doing with Penn. And I think she deserves a lot of credit for that. So I thank Mary Jo and the staff at MELC. And this weekend, I was reminded about one of the reasons I really love living here. And I took my family to the Norworth egg hunt. And I kind of paid attention because I had a lot of family members fighting to spend time with my daughter. So I had some minutes to just look around, and we owe the 4th of July committee, who puts on this event free of charge, a major, major shout out. They did a lot of work, and that egg hunt could not have been any better. And it just made me really proud to be a Narb, and I was proud that my family could come to my hometown and spend time with my daughter at an event like that. And I just think we owe the 4th of July committee
Absolutely. Fireworks to come.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, Councilor Tevlin Moffett.
Public Safety and the Civil Service Commission received a letter of resignation from Carrie Saltner, who had served on the commission. And she has left the borough, and so we're going to accept her letter of resignation with much unhappiness. And we want her here, and we want her to help us on Civil Service Commission. But we do accept it. We understand that things change in people's lives. But thank you, Carrie, for the time you committed and what you did for us. You answered the call, and so I appreciate that greatly. We will then, of course, have to advertise this position. And no, you don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to know extensive amounts of information about police work. What we do ask is that you bring your best, all your great questions and your own background to this position in order to help the community and the Civil Service Commission, quite clearly, in hiring officers and other ideas that come to their service. So,
if I could just buttress Gigi real quick.
Please go right ahead.
Just as a reminder to any interested applicant out there, because Carrie was just appointed in summer of 18, and her term would have expired in December of 2022. So it's a term through 2022.
Okay. So two orders of business. One would be if someone wants to make a motion, we can accept this letter of resignation. We could do that first.
I'll make a motion that we accept Carrie Saltner's resignation from the Civil Service Commission.
Is there a second?
Our second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye. Thanks, Carrie. We miss you.
See you go. The next would be a motion to move Mr. Gonzalez from the alternate position onto the Civil Service as a full member.
Mr.
Not Mr. Who's currently?
He's the alternate.
He's the alternate.
No, he's not. He was appointed to a full position.
We made him a full member.
Now we have an empty.
Yes,
and we have an empty alternate.
His term's through
No. We moved them
2024.
both. Do you remember? We moved them both to full positions, and we were seeking the alternate.
Yeah, he's got a full term
He
that's
has
good
two
through
full terms.
2024.
Yeah.
We'll come back to this in 2 weeks.
I would love two alternates. If I could get one, that would be great, but two would be better.
He's got a full term.
The message to the public is there are openings.
Yeah.
And
Send your letters.
Experience in HR, recruiting, hiring.
Yeah.
Because you resigned.
It's more interesting than you might
He
think.
got yours, and then we reappointed him.
All right. Well, we'll
I'm
let
sorry,
the office
I
sort
didn't
this
mean
out.
You're right.
Yeah.
All right. It's getting late.
I remember that stuff.
Any other comments? My one comment.
One comment from
At our last meeting, we had a wonderful young artist come and make a presentation about a mural he intended to do, and thanks to support of the community, specifically one anonymous citizen who sponsored all the cost of his art materials, etc. Well, I had another citizen reach out to me who also would like to remain anonymous and thought that it would be wrong for him not to be compensated for his work. So an honorarium was donated, which he will receive, upon completion of the work.
Wonderful news.
So if you're watching, and the office will coordinate.
Terrific.
Any new business?
I had,
Yes, Ms. Dowd.
I would appreciate being present at the next council meeting where we discuss the comprehensive plan. I do have a standing work obligation on the 1st of May. One of my other communities that I work for has a planning commission meeting that night, so I'm obligated to be there and will be unable to attend the meeting. So I respectfully ask that if we could move the resolution for adoption for the comprehensive plan then to the 15th of May, right? Is that the next?
Is there a general consensus on council? that
We can't do it without
We can't do it without Maggie, great.
Just making sure. Mr. Walker, could you reopen the hearing?
Is there an
She's a no-brainer.
Does council have an expectation that they would like to receive potentially additional feedback and allow additional comments from the public at that time?
Yes.
And if
Well,
I
we
could,
do
if
extend
I
the
could
hearing.
ask, is there,
Yes, go ahead, Maggie.
is there a recommendation that council would like to give me to enhance the public outreach? If we are tabling this for another month, I could take another stab at working with the community and promoting this outreach.
Given the reason we
Just a
wanted
discussion.
time,
I'm sorry. We just discussed in F&A, we started to discuss our communication plan, and one of those aspects was the kiosks, which is really the only thing you didn't do. I mean, you reached out via every technological aspect. So I think extending this and not coming up with something different really is just wasting 45 days. So perhaps we can take a look prior to the full communication plan of putting up some notices in the kiosk and then asking for that hyperlink to the document with maybe a nice big alarm and Friday's email.
And may I ask?
Question about that. Is it possible that the county could make a kind of poster that would fit with
that's
sort
what I
of
was
it's the informational thing about hits the high points of the plan and announces the
And the meeting.
and announces the meeting?
Yes, is there a specific size you need?
The office will communicate.
Communicate. Okay,
And there's
perfect.
four- and there's not
So,
enough time.
if then Mr. West would just send me communication about posters and quantities and any additional information that my office can provide, and then we can seek to do additional outreach. And for any members of the public who are listening, please tell your friends, tell your neighbors, make sure that we get the word out, because like I said, public outreach is always a struggle, and I know it's a hefty document to read. If you read nothing else, read the implementation chart. It gives you a quick snapshot of all of those elements that we talk about in the plan, and we will take another stab at the outreach, and so we'll get those posters out.
For outreach purposes, if we have not already done so, can we have a few hard copies available at the library for anybody who wants to read it on paper copy?
Yep, we have paper copies already at the library and here at Borough Hall.
There you go. Great.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Welcome.
So we're going to turn back into the public hearing on Norworth 2040 Comprehensive Plan. We're going to reopen up the record, and at this time, we're going to strike the previous continuance. And now the hearing is going to be continued until May 15th, 7:30, Borough Hall. So this will be the only legal notice given. So we're continuing this on the record until May 15th, 7:30, and I hope that the record would reflect that when the notes are transcribed. So at that time, we will continue the hearing, and we will close the hearing for today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other new business?
I just had one, this woke me up, and I was ready to adjourn, but it just
Oh,
woke me up to
okay.
one thought that I've had, is that with those kiosks, a suggestion for F&A and to ask the council, we have a brand new bridge coming, and that at some point, and plans, the thing is designed, and it was designed by like a world-renowned architect, and it was long before we were on council, this architect was selected, and this has been in the works a long time. And the renderings of that bridge are really amazing. They're really amazing.
Yeah.
They're really good. And I was wondering if we might be able to commission the architectural firm. I don't know how much it would cost, but if we could ask them to make us a poster that we could put in the kiosks box. Because they have all the graphics.
When we're done with the planning.
And when we're done with that, but they have the graphics capability, and that's what they do. And maybe, who knows, maybe they would do it as a lost leader even just because it's an advertisement for their firm.
Yeah.
But it's
That's
a
how they're
bridge
gonna do
that's
it.
coming soon,
Exactly.
But anyway,
That's what they're going to do.
that's my piece of new business.
I don't think we need a
Really
motion.
good.
I see some nodding, and I'm going to
And
ask
we
the
are
office.
coming down the flow chart in the communication priority, so we will have
Yes.
something to bring to you all soon.
I'm excited. I know the community is.
Everyone's excited.
Any old business? All right, before we adjourn, we need to have a brief executive session to discuss litigation. It will be very brief. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
Motion adjourned.
All right.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, 3 minutes.